If you've ever wondered whether success can replace love, or whether money can heal 20 years of silence, then stay with me until the very end. Because my children ignored me for 2 decades. They forgot my birthday. They forgot Christmas. They forgot I even existed. But the day my will was read, they finally remembered they had a father. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from. Now let me tell you the story of how 20 years of silence ended with one final letter. My name is Arthur Bennett. I'm 78 years old. People in my town knew me as the quiet old man who lived in a white farmhouse on Willow Creek Road. Every morning I watered the flowers my wife planted before she passed away. Every afternoon I sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee, and every evening I waited for a phone call that almost never came. My wife Margaret used to tell me something. "Arthur, when we're old, money won't matter. Our children will." Back then, I believed her. We had 3 children, Michael, Sarah, and Daniel. When they were little, they were my entire world. I worked 12-hour shifts at a manufacturing plant. On weekends, I repaired neighbors' roofs just to earn extra money, not because I wanted a bigger house. Because I wanted my children to have opportunities I never had. When Michael wanted to attend law school, I sold my classic pickup truck. When Sarah dreamed of becoming a doctor, Margaret and I refinanced our home. When Daniel wanted to start his own business, I emptied nearly every dollar from my retirement account. Every sacrifice felt worth it. Watching your children succeed is supposed to be a parent's greatest reward. At least, that's what I believed. After Margaret passed away from breast cancer 20 years ago, everything changed. The funeral ended on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My children hugged me, told me they would visit often, promised I'd never be alone. For the first few months, they called every weekend, then every other weekend, then once a month, then silence. Life became too busy. Michael became one of the city's most successful attorneys. Sarah opened a private medical practice. Daniel expanded his construction company across 3 states. They were all successful. Everything I'd hoped for. Except, none of them had time for their father. The first birthday after Margaret died, I cooked dinner for 4 people. I made Michael's favorite steak, Sarah's favorite mashed potatoes, Daniel's favorite peach pie. I even polished the silverware Margaret loved using on special occasions. 6 o'clock came, then 7, then 8. Nobody arrived. At 9 that night, my phone finally rang. It was Michael. "Dad, I'm really sorry. Something came up. We'll celebrate next week." Next week never came. The following Christmas wasn't much different. I wrapped presents for everyone, labeled each gift carefully, placed them beneath the tree. I waited all day. The turkey grew cold. The fireplace burned low. Outside, snow covered the driveway. Inside, the only sound was the ticking of the old grandfather clock Margaret bought on our 25th anniversary. Late that evening, Sarah sent a text. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Sorry we couldn't make it." That was all. 8 words, 20 years of raising her, reduced to 8 words. Year after year, the pattern repeated itself. Missed birthdays, forgotten anniversaries, empty holidays. Sometimes months passed without hearing a single voice from any of them. Neighbors would ask, "Are your kids visiting this weekend?" I'd smile. "They're busy." I always defended them, even when they didn't deserve it. One spring afternoon, my neighbor, Frank, walked across the street carrying a toolbox. "Arthur, I noticed your porch steps are loose. I'll fix them." I smiled. "You've already helped enough." Frank laughed. "That's what neighbors do." As we repaired the porch together, he asked quietly, "When was the last time your children were here?" I couldn't remember. That frightened me, not because they'd been gone, because the first stopped counting. A few weeks later, Frank suffered a heart attack. He passed away before the ambulance reached the hospital. His funeral was filled with family, children, grandchildren, friends. Standing beside his grave, I realized something. Frank wasn't richer than me. He wasn't more successful, but he died surrounded by love. I drove home alone. That night, I opened the old photo albums Margaret always kept in the living room cabinet. There was Michael holding my hand on his first day of school, Sarah asleep on my chest after a nightmare, Daniel sitting on my shoulders during the county fair. Each picture reminded me of happier days. Days when my children fought over who got to sit beside me at dinner. Days when hearing "Dad" from the front yard was the happiest sound in the world. I closed the album, looked around the silent house, and asked myself one painful question. When did I stop being their father and become their obligation? The answer never came. But something else did. The next morning, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox. There was no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, "Mr. Bennett, you don't know me, but your life is about to change. Please meet me at the Willow Creek Cafe tomorrow morning at 10. Come alone. You'll finally learn the truth." I read the note 3 times. Who would send something like this? And what truth could possibly be waiting for an old man everyone had already forgotten? I folded the letter, placed it in my pocket, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The next morning, I arrived at Willow Creek Cafe, 15 minutes early. It was a small, family-owned place where Margaret and I used to eat breakfast every Saturday. Some things hadn't changed. The smell of fresh coffee still filled the air. The old jukebox still sat quietly in the corner. The waitress, Linda, still greeted customers with the same warm smile she'd worn for nearly 30 years. She recognized me immediately. "Arthur, it's been a while." I smiled. "It has." She poured me a cup of black coffee without asking. Margaret always joked that Linda knew my order better than I did. I looked toward the entrance every few seconds. Whoever had sent the letter was late. At exactly 10 o'clock. The cafe door opened. A young woman, probably in her early 30s, walked inside carrying a leather folder. She looked around until our eyes met Mr. Bennett. "Yes, I'm Emily Carter." She sat across from me. Her hands were shaking. "You don't know me?" "No, but I knew your wife. That caught my attention immediately." "You knew Margaret?" Emily nodded. "I volunteered with her at the community library years ago." I smiled for the first time that morning. She loved that place. "I know." Emily slowly opened her folder. "I've wanted to meet you for years." "Why now?" "Because I finally found the courage." She slid several papers across the table. I looked down. My name appeared at the top of every page. "What are these?" "Your investment statements." I frowned. "I don't have investments." Emily smiled gently. "Actually, you do." I looked confused. "My wife handled most of our finances." Emily nodded. "She also planned your future." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" 6 months before she passed away, Margaret came to the financial firm where I worked. She asked us to help her create a long-term investment plan. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She never told me. She wanted it to be a surprise. Emily handed me another document. Every year after her passing, the investments continued growing. I slowly turned each page. The numbers became larger and larger. Then I reached the final statement. My hands froze. Balance: $14,862,411. I blinked, looked again. Surely I was reading it wrong. There has to be a mistake. Emily quietly shook her head. "No mistake. Margaret invested wisely. And after you continued adding small amounts every month, the portfolio grew beyond anyone's expectations." I leaned back in my chair. $14 million. I had spent 20 years believing I was living on a modest retirement. Meanwhile, my late wife had quietly built a fortune. Emily smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Bennett. You're one of our firm's oldest clients." I couldn't even speak. "Finally," I whispered. "My children don't know." Emily looked directly into my eyes. "I know." "How?" "Because they called." My heart skipped. "What?" She nodded. "Over the past 5 years, each of your children contacted our office separately." I frowned. "They did?" "Yes." "What did they want?" "They asked about your estate." I felt something break inside me. "They never asked about me?" Emily slowly lowered her eyes. "No, they only wanted to know what would happen when you died." The cafe suddenly felt very quiet. I looked out the window. Cars passed by. People laughed on the sidewalk. Life continued. But inside me, something changed forever. Emily reached into her folder again. They all asked the same question. What was it? How much is our father worth? Not, is he healthy? Not, is he happy? Not, does he need anything? Only, how much? I quietly folded my hands. Margaret had always believed our children would come back. She used to say, "They're busy now." When life slows down, they'll remember us. But life hadn't slowed down. Their love had. Emily gently pushed one final envelope toward me. Margaret left instructions. I looked surprised. For me, yes. She said if there ever came a day when you discovered everything, I was to give you this. The envelope had Margaret's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single letter. My dearest Arthur, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone. And if our children still haven't found their way home, promise me one thing. Don't leave them money simply because they're family. Leave them something they'll actually need. A reason to remember what love looks like by the time I reach the end. Tears blurred every word. Emily quietly handed me a tissue. Margaret had written that letter 20 years earlier, yet somehow she already knew. She knew money could change people. She knew success could make children forget the hands that raised them. She even knew one day I'd have to make the hardest decision of my life. Who deserved my legacy? As I carefully folded Margaret's letter and placed it back inside the envelope, Emily asked one final question. Mr. Bennett, have you ever updated your will? I slowly shook my head. No, she smiled gently. I think it's finally time. At that exact moment, across town, 3 different people received the exact same phone call. It wasn't from me. It wasn't from Emily. It was from one of the nation's largest financial firms. And for the first time in 20 years, every one of my children suddenly wanted to know how their father was doing. The phone rang just after sunrise. I was standing on the front porch, watering Margaret's roses when I heard it echo through the house. I already knew who it was, not because the number looked familiar, because I hadn't received 3 missed calls in a single morning in nearly 20 years. The first call came from Michael, the second from Sarah, the third from Daniel. I stared at the screen for several seconds, then I placed the phone back into my pocket. For 20 years, every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day, I had waited for those calls. Now, suddenly, they couldn't stop calling. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. Hello, Dad! Michael's voice sounded unusually cheerful. How are you? I smiled sadly. That's an interesting question. What do you mean? It's the first time you've asked me in almost 3 years. Silence, then he laughed nervously. Work has been crazy. I understand. I've been meaning to visit. I understand. You know how life gets. I understand. He paused. So, how have you been? I've been 78. What? I've been lonely. I've buried your mother. I've celebrated 20 birthdays without my family. I've eaten 20 Christmas dinners alone. Another long silence. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner tonight. Tonight. Not last year, not 5 years ago, not when I spent weeks in the hospital after pneumonia. Tonight. I quietly replied. I already have plans. Oh, tomorrow then. I'll let you know. Before he could say anything else, I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. That afternoon, Sarah arrived unexpectedly. She stepped out of a brand new luxury SUV wearing an expensive designer coat. The same daughter who once lived only 15 minutes away, yet somehow never found time to visit. She walked toward the porch carrying a bouquet of flowers. Dad. She hugged me. The hug felt strange, like someone hugging a stranger they recognized from an old photograph. I brought your favorites. I looked at the flowers. They're beautiful. She smiled. I've missed you. I looked directly into her eyes. No, you missed something. Her smile faded. What do you mean? I've lived here every day. You always knew where I was. You didn't miss me. You simply chose not to come. She looked down. I know. I'm sorry. Are you? She nodded quickly. Of course. I invited her inside. Not because I trusted her, because I wanted to hear what she had come to say. She looked around the living room. Nothing had changed. Margaret's piano still stood beside the fireplace. The old family photograph still lined the walls. Sarah picked up one picture. She was 8 years old, missing her front tooth, laughing while I pushed her on the backyard swing. I remember this day. So do I. You cried because you fell. You carried me all the way inside. You told me I'd always be your little girl. You still are." She smiled. For just a second, I saw my daughter again. Not the successful doctor, not the woman wearing a $5,000 coat, just my little girl. Then, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, quickly turned it over, but not before I saw the name Michael. She wasn't here alone, they were talking, planning, coordinating. I didn't say a word. A few minutes later, she finally asked the question she'd really come to ask. "Dad, have you updated your will recently?" There it was. Not, "Are you happy?" Not, "Do you need anything?" The will. I smiled politely. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason. I was just thinking, it's important to have everything organized." "I agree. So, have you?" I looked toward Margaret's photograph sitting on the bookshelf, then answered calmly, "Yes." Sarah's eyes widened. "You have?" "I finished it yesterday." She tried to hide her excitement. "That's wonderful. I hope everything is fair." Fair. Such a dangerous word. I smiled. "It is." She looked relieved. "I knew you'd do the right thing." I almost laughed. She had no idea what the right thing actually was. That evening, my doorbell rang again. This time, Daniel and Michael stood together, both smiling, both carrying expensive gift baskets. Michael laughed. "Looks like we had the same idea." Daniel nodded. "We thought we'd surprise you. For 20 years, not one surprise. Now, 2 in one day. I invited them inside. We sat around the same dining table where Margaret once served Sunday dinners. The silence felt uncomfortable. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Dad, we've all been thinking." "About what?" "We haven't been close." "That's true. We want to change that." "I see." Michael leaned forward. "Family should stick together." I nodded. "I've believed that my whole life." Daniel smiled. "So, what do you say? Can we start over?" I looked at all 3 of my children. 3 successful adults. 3 people I love more than life itself. 3 strangers sitting inside my home. Then I quietly asked one question. If I had absolutely nothing, no savings, no house, no inheritance, would the 3 of you still be sitting at this table tonight? No one answered. Not one word. Because deep down, every one of them already knew the truth. And so did I. At that exact moment, inside my desk drawer, rested a newly signed will. A will containing one decision that would leave my entire family speechless the day it was finally read. 1 week passed. Not a single day went by without one of my children calling. Michael wanted to take me to dinner. Sarah wanted to schedule a full medical checkup. Daniel insisted on repairing everything around the house. 20 years, nothing. 1 week, everything. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so heartbreaking. Saturday afternoon, Michael arrived carrying a brand new television. "Dad, your old one barely works. It still turns on. But this one's 85 inches. I smiled. "I don't need 85 inches. You deserve it." "No, I deserved your time." The smile disappeared from his face. He quietly placed the television back into his truck. An hour later, Sarah arrived with expensive groceries, organic vegetables, premium steaks, imported desserts. She filled my refrigerator, then smiled proudly. "There. Now you won't have to shop for weeks," I thanked her. But after she left, I quietly packed every bag into my truck and drove to the local food bank. Families there actually needed it. That evening, Daniel showed up with 2 contractors. "We're remodeling your kitchen." I looked confused. "I never asked for that. You deserve better. I've been happy with this kitchen for 40 years. It's outdated, so am I." He laughed. "I didn't. I'm not changing it." He looked disappointed. "Why not?" "Because your mother designed every cabinet, every shelf, every color. I'm not tearing down her memories just because someone else thinks they're old." Daniel nodded silently. For the first time, he looked ashamed. The following Monday, I met Emily again at the financial firm. She introduced me to Mr. Harrison, the senior estate attorney. He welcomed me into a large conference room. "Mr. Bennett, I've reviewed your assets." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents listing everything Margaret and I had quietly built: investment accounts, commercial properties, dividend stocks, municipal bonds, even land I had completely forgotten buying decades ago. Mr. Harrison smiled. "Your total estate is now valued at just over." He glanced at the final page. $22 million. I stared at him. He nodded. "Million." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Margaret would have laughed. She always said, "Arthur, one day you'll realize small sacrifices become big blessings." She had been right. Mr. Harrison leaned forward. You mentioned your children. Yes. You also mentioned they haven't been part of your life for many years. That's true. I'd like to ask something. Go ahead. What do you want your legacy to accomplish? It was a simple question, but I couldn't answer immediately. Did I want revenge? No. Did I want to punish them? Not really. What I wanted was for them to understand that love isn't measured after someone dies. It's measured while they're still alive. I looked at Mr. Harrison. I don't want my money to teach them greed. I want it to teach them regret. He slowly nodded. I believe I know exactly how to do that. That night, I sat alone on the porch. Margaret's old journal rested on my lap. Inside, she had written hundreds of little memories. One page caught my attention. If our children ever forget where they came from, don't remind them with money, remind them with memories. I smiled through tears. You always knew, didn't you? A gentle breeze moved through the oak trees. For just a moment, it almost felt like she was sitting beside me again. I quietly closed the journal, then reached for my phone. I opened the family group chat. The last message was almost 3 years old. Happy New Year. No replies. No conversations. Nothing. I typed a new message. Family dinner. Next Sunday. I'd love to see all of you. Within 30 seconds, every child replied, We'll be there. Absolutely. Can't wait. I stared at the screen. 20 years, and suddenly everyone was available. They believed the dinner was about reconciliation. They believed it was about love. None of them knew. Their father had already signed the most important document of his life. A document that wouldn't change their future because of the money it contained, but because of the words written inside it. Words that would leave every person sitting at that dinner table completely speechless. The following Sunday, for the first time in 20 years, every chair around my dining table was occupied. Michael arrived first with his wife, Rebecca. Sarah came a few minutes later with her husband, Thomas. Daniel walked in last, carrying an expensive bottle of wine. Everyone smiled. Everyone laughed. Everyone acted as though nothing had ever happened, as if 20 years could simply disappear over one family dinner. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching them talk. The same room that had once echoed with children's laughter now felt like a business meeting. Michael raised his glass. To family. Everyone repeated the toast. To family. I lifted my glass too, but inside, I couldn't help wondering, where had this family been for the last 20 years? Dinner was pleasant. Almost too pleasant. Michael kept asking about my health. Sarah insisted I should move closer to her hospital. Daniel offered to renovate my entire house for free. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every smile looked practiced. Then Daniel finally asked the question he'd been waiting to ask all evening. Dad, have you thought about what'll happen with the house someday? The room became quiet. Michael pretended to keep eating. Sarah looked down at her plate. They had clearly discussed this beforehand. I calmly answered, Yes. Daniel smiled. I'm glad. I know Mom would have wanted everything kept in the family. I looked toward Margaret's photograph hanging beside the fireplace. Your mother wanted many things, but not everything happens the way we hope. Nobody spoke. After dinner, I walked into the living room, pulled out an old wooden box. Inside were hundreds of photographs, little handmade birthday cards, school drawings, old report cards. Michael smiled. I haven't seen these in years. I handed him one picture. It showed him at age 10, standing beside the bicycle I'd worked 3 months of overtime to buy. Remember that? He nodded. I do. You cried because you thought I couldn't afford it. His eyes slowly filled with tears. I remember. I handed Sarah another photograph. She was wearing a white doctor's coat, the day she graduated from medical school. I almost missed that ceremony. She looked surprised. What? I collapsed at work that morning. I worked an overnight shift because tuition was due. I never told you. Her face turned pale. You never said anything. There wasn't any reason. Daniel quietly stared at an old newspaper clipping. It showed the ribbon-cutting ceremony for his first construction company. I smiled. You remember who signed the loan papers? His voice barely came out. You did. I mortgaged my retirement. He lowered his head. I know. No, you didn't. If you had, you would have visited. The room became silent again. No one could argue, because every memory inside that wooden box carried the same message. Everything they had started with 2 parents who sacrificed everything. When everyone finally left that night, the house became quiet once more. But this time, the silence felt different. Not lonely, peaceful. I walked upstairs, opened Margaret's closet. Her favorite blue sweater still hung exactly where she'd left it. I gently touched the sleeve. I think they're finally beginning to understand. Of course. She didn't answer. But somehow, I felt close to her again. Over the next several months, life settled into a routine. My children visited more often, sometimes together, sometimes alone. They invited me to birthdays, family barbecues, holiday dinners. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people. Yet something inside me never completely trusted the change. One rainy afternoon, I visited Mr. Harrison. He handed me the finalized copy of my will. Everything is complete. I opened the first page. Every sentence had been carefully written. Every instruction reflected exactly what Margaret had hoped for. Mr. Harrison looked at me. "Are you certain?" I smiled. "I've never been more certain." He locked the original inside the firm's vault. "No one will know its contents until the appropriate time." I nodded. "That's exactly how I want it." Winter arrived. The snow-covered Willow Creek Road. My health slowly began changing. At first, it was only fatigue, then dizziness, then shortness of breath. Emily insisted I visit Sarah's hospital. After several tests, the cardiologist quietly entered my room. He pulled up a chair. "Mr. Bennett, I'm afraid your heart is becoming weaker." "How much time?" He hesitated. "We don't know. Months. Maybe longer. But you should begin preparing. Preparing. Funny word. No one is ever prepared to leave the life they built." I drove home that evening, parked beside the old oak tree, watched snowflakes settle across the front yard. The same yard where my children once built snowmen, where Margaret planted roses, where we'd celebrated birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, an entire lifetime. I smiled, not because I was ready to die, because I had finally finished everything that mattered. One cold December morning. I never woke up. The house remained quiet. Coffee never brewed. The porch light stayed on. When my neighbor noticed the newspaper still lying untouched in the driveway, he called the sheriff. By noon, my children received the phone call they had feared, and perhaps expected. "Your father passed away peacefully in his sleep." 3 days later, they stood together inside the old church, listening as friends, neighbors, former co-workers, and complete strangers shared stories they had never heard before. Only then did they begin to realize they had never truly known the man they called Dad. But the biggest surprise was still waiting. Because the following morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, every member of the Bennett family would sit inside Harrison and Cole law offices, where Arthur Bennett's final will would be read aloud for the very first time. And nothing would ever be the same again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone you love. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the chance to become the family you should have been all along.